A frozen bay, a village gathered, a trap of ice holding giants of the sea. Then, a crack, a rush of water, a moment that turned wonder into fear. What happens when the ocean's top predator is cornered, and the ice gives way? The Arctic is a land of beauty and peril. Fox Basin, Nunavut, 1955. A vast white wilderness where the sea breathes through cracks in the ice, and life hangs on by a thread. For centuries, Inuit hunters had learned the rules here. Respect the ice, respect the animals, and never underestimate the sea. But one winter afternoon, those rules were broken. A group of Inuit hunters and villagers discovered a rare and unsettling sight. A pod of killer whales, 10 to 12 in number, trapped in a shrinking pocket of open water called a polynya. These apex predators, feared and revered, were cornered by the very ice that usually kept them at bay. Their black dorsal fins cut the water like knives. Their haunting breaths rose into the freezing air. The villagers gathered at the edge of the ice to watch. For some, it was a spectacle. For others, it was an omen. The elders whispered warnings. Stay back. Orcas are cunning, strong enough to shatter ice, and desperate when cornered. But among the younger men, curiosity was stronger than caution, and one of them, eager, bold, and fearless, would step closer to the edge of fate than anyone should. The whales were waiting. The air was razor-sharp with cold, the kind that bites into bone. The pod of orcas surfaced again, their breaths hissing like steam engines trapped under the ice. Each exhale was a reminder. Predators, alive, powerful, and restless. The elders, their faces carved with lines of wisdom and survival, spoke urgently. Do not go near. The whales can break the ice. Their voices carried the weight of generations who had seen nature's fury firsthand. But one young man, restless, curious, perhaps daring the impossible, ignored them. He wanted a closer look. Maybe it was pride, maybe youthful arrogance, maybe the thrill of standing over one of the most feared hunters of the sea. Step by step, he ventured out. The frozen crust creaked beneath his boots, spiderweb cracks whispering warnings he could no longer hear. The orcas below shifted, their sleek bodies circling, their pale eye patches flashing like ghostly masks beneath the dark water. From the edge, the villagers shouted for him to stop, but he pressed forward, drawn to the movement beneath the ice as if spellbound. The whales were not trapped prey. They were waiting, patient, calculating, and watching him as closely as he was watching them. One wrong move, and the balance between man and beast would shatter. A silence hung over the bay, broken only by the thunderous blow of an orca surfacing beneath the fragile sheet. The young hunter froze. Beneath his boots, the ice moaned, a deep, groaning warning that carried through the still air. Then it happened. With terrifying speed, a massive black shape surged upward. The water erupted as an orca slammed its bulk into the ice from below. The flow cracked like a gunshot. A jagged fracture tore outward, and the hunter's footing vanished in an instant. He plunged into the freezing water, a scream ripped from his throat as the Arctic swallowed him whole. His arms flailed against the crushing cold, but the orcas were already there. Dark dorsal fins sliced the surface. The sea churned with power as the predators closed in. On the shore, the villagers cried out helplessly. They could see his hands clawing at the ice edge, his breath coming in desperate gasps. But each attempt to climb free was met by another surge from below, the whales striking the flow, breaking it further, denying him escape. The hunter was no longer an observer. He was prey. The freezing water closed over him like a coffin. He thrashed, clawing toward the light above, but the orcas were faster. One enormous shadow surged beneath him. Teeth, black and white, glistening and jagged, clamped onto his leg. The hunter's scream was swallowed by the sea as he was ripped downward. The water turned violent, churning with bubbles and streaks of red as the pod attacked in unison. On shore, horrified villagers could only watch as his body was dragged deeper into the icy void. For a heartbeat, his arm broke the surface, reaching, pleading, before another orca rammed him, yanking him down once more. The water stilled. Only the circling fins remained. The hunter had vanished. It was as if the ocean itself had claimed him, erasing him in seconds. When the water finally calmed, the villagers rushed onto the brittle ice, their hearts pounding, their voices carrying his name into the emptiness. But the polynya, that gaping black wound in the ice, offered no answers. They searched the edges with poles, peered into the dark water, waiting for his body to resurface. Minutes dragged into an eternity. Only the faint ripples of the orcas circling below broke the stillness. No bubbles, no movement, no trace. The hunters knew the truth, even if they couldn't bring themselves to speak it. The sea had swallowed him whole. The orcas had left nothing behind. On the ice, the silence was unbearable. The only sound was the distant breath of the killers below, a hollow hiss rising from their blowholes, as if mocking the humans above. The young man was gone, forever. The village never forgot. In hushed tones around oil lamps, the elders told the tale, how the ice cracked, how the orcas lunged, how a young man vanished without a trace. To outsiders, it was dismissed as myth, a fisherman's story, too monstrous to be real. But to the Inuit, it was a warning etched in blood and ice. The sea had taken him, and the killers beneath had devoured what was left. Every retelling carried the same shiver. This was no ordinary accident. This was the moment when the most feared predator of the ocean reached up through the ice and claimed one of their own. And so the story became legend, passed from elder to child, a reminder that nature does not forgive arrogance, and that even the cleverest hunter can become prey. Fox Basin was no ordinary hunting ground. It was a place where sea ice ruled, where polinas, those rare pools of open water, became lifelines for both hunters and hunted. And in the winter of 1955, it trapped a dozen orcas in a watery prison. They circled endlessly in the shrinking hole, their sleek black backs cutting the surface, their jaws snapping at passing seals. But seals were scarce. Hunger gnawed at the predators, and hunger makes even the most intelligent animal desperate. The Inuit called them akwakpak, the great killers. They had watched orcas strike seals off ice floes before. They had seen them ram floes with brutal force, shattering ice to reach the prey above. But what happened here was different. That day, the orcas weren't after seals. They weren't after walrus. They were after a man. When the young hunter stepped too close, the pod reacted with terrifying precision. A giant bull surged upward, smashing the ice beneath him. In an instant, he was in the water, surrounded. The orcas didn't hesitate. They attacked like wolves, but faster, colder, more ruthless. What followed was chaos. The hunter vanished beneath thrashing black and white bodies, his screams swallowed by the roar of breaking ice. By the time the water stilled, only blood and foam remained. For the Inuit, it was proof of what their elders had always whispered, that orcas were not just hunters of the sea, but hunters of anything that dared cross their path. When the frenzy ended, silence fell across the ice. The hunters who had watched from a distance stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. The water where the young man had fallen was empty now, eerily empty. Nobody floated to the surface. No torn clothing, no trace of the hunter at all. It was as if the orcas had swallowed him whole, dragging him into a black abyss from which no human returns. The hole in the ice foamed with bubbles for a few heartbeats more, then went still. The villagers searched, calling his name into the freezing winds, but the sea gave nothing back. Not a limb, not even a bone. The pod had erased him as efficiently as a storm erases footprints in the snow. For the Inuit, it was a chilling confirmation. Orcas were not just hunters, but ghosts of the deep. When they chose a man as prey, they didn't just kill him, they made him vanish. And in Fox Basin, that vanishing became legend. In the days that followed, the village sat in silence. No one spoke of the young hunter's name aloud. Instead, they whispered of the orcas. The elders had warned them, always warned them, that these whales were not like the others. To the Inuit, orcas were beings of immense cunning, hunters who could read the ice, who could outthink men. Some said they were tunirjuat, spirits disguised as animals. The story of the boy spread quickly, how he had ignored the warnings, how he had stood on thin ice above trapped predators, and how the ocean itself had claimed him. To the elders, it was not just a tragedy. It was a lesson carved in fear. The sea always takes back what it is owed. Around the fires, families spoke in hushed voices, children wide-eyed, as the tale transformed into something larger than life. The orcas beneath the ice were no longer just animals. They were shadows of punishment, reminders that even the bravest hunter could vanish with a single misstep. And so the legend grew, carried on the wind across Fox Basin, a chilling tale that blurred the line between survival and myth. For decades after, the story lingered like frost in the minds of those who lived along Fox Basin. Children were told never to stray too close to the ice holes, never to tease the ocean with curiosity. The lesson was clear. What lurks below is watching, waiting. Hunters carried the tale with them on every expedition. Even in silence, they would glance nervously at the black cracks in the ice, imagining the gleam of an orca's eyes staring back. Some swore they could hear it, the faint echo of water breaking, the rush of a giant body rising beneath the floes. To outsiders, it sounded like a myth, another ghost story told in the frozen north. But to the Inuit who lived there, it was not a myth at all. It was a memory, a warning written in blood and ice. And for every hunter who ventured out afterward, the shadow of that night in 1955 walked beside them. The Fox Basin incident has been passed down for generations, whispered in hushed tones by elders and hunters alike. But outside the Inuit community, it remains a mystery, part chilling testimony, part legend carved into ice. There were no photographs, no body, no forensic proof, only the words of those who lived it. Researchers who later studied the story admitted they could not verify every detail. Some dismissed it as folklore, a warning tale spun from fear of the sea. But others pointed to the predator itself. Orcas are apex hunters, fully capable of ramming ice, flipping seals, even dragging prey into the water. Could they have done the same to a man? Absolutely. The physics, the behavior, the raw power, all make the story plausible. So was it a myth? Or the only true record of a man killed and consumed by wild orcas? That uncertainty only adds to the terror. Because if it happened once, who's to say it couldn't happen again? In the end, the Fox Basin tragedy, whether absolute fact or folklore etched in memory, remains a brutal reminder of a truth humans often forget. In the wild, we are not the masters. We are prey. The young hunter stepped onto the ice with curiosity and confidence, believing he could stand above the orcas below. But in one instant, the balance shifted. The ocean cracked, the ice collapsed, and nature claimed him with ruthless efficiency. Orcas are not monsters. They are survival perfected, apex predators forged in ice and salt water. To them, the difference between seal, whale, or man may vanish in the chaos of opportunity. For the Inuit, the story endures not as spectacle, but as warning. The sea gives life, but it also takes it, without hesitation, without mercy. And so the tale of Fox Basin lingers, half history, half nightmare. A young man swallowed by the Arctic waters, his body never returned. Only silence, ice, and the echo of a truth too chilling to forget. Because when you walk on the edge of nature's domain, sometimes nature walks back. The Fox Basin hunter's story is a reminder. When we step onto nature's stage, we do so at our own risk. The sea doesn't forgive. It doesn't forget. If this haunting tale gripped you, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next story. Another shocking encounter where humans came face to face with a predator, and not everyone made it back alive. Stay tuned. The next true story is one you won't want to miss. But that would not be the last time these icy waters turned violent. From the frozen Fox Basin in 1955 to the warm waters where Hans Kretschmer met his fate, one predator remained the same. I am 18 years old, surfboard under him. The Pacific stretches endless and calm. Then, sudden agony. Something enormous clamps onto his leg and side, dragging him under. At first, he thinks it's a shark, but it isn't. It's bigger, smarter. A predator no surfer ever expects. A wild killer whale has taken him in its jaws. And somehow, Hans Kretschmer lived to tell the tale. The waves off Point Sur rolled heavy that afternoon, the kind of surf that draws the fearless. Hans Kretschmer, just 18, carved along the water's face with the confidence of youth. Salt air, sun on his back, nothing but ocean beneath him. And then, sudden violence. From below, a force like a freight train. Jaws clamped onto his thigh and side, teeth slicing deep into flesh and muscle. The ocean went red around him. His body convulsed as he was wrenched downward, lungs burning, his board torn from his feet. His first thought was a shark. the nightmare every surfer carries. But as the immense black and white shape surged beside him, he realized the truth. It wasn't a shark. It was far worse. A killer whale. An apex predator with the power to break seals like toys. And now it had him. Hans thrashed in blind terror, blood pouring into the sea. His scream never left his throat, muffled by salt water. And still the teeth dug in, holding him fast. For one horrifying moment, an 18-year-old surfer hung between life and death, locked in the jaws of a wild orca. Hans Kretschmer wasn't a daredevil by reputation. He was a teenager chasing waves, freedom, and the raw thrill of the Pacific. Born and raised in California, the ocean was more than recreation. It was part of his identity. Surf culture in the late 1970s was gritty and real. No social media, no polished surf brands. Just young men and women chasing swells, trading stories on the beach, and paddling out into cold, shark-haunted waters with little more than courage and wax on their boards. For Hans, this was paradise. Friends described him as adventurous but grounded. He wasn't reckless, but he wasn't afraid of the unknown either. At 18, life stretched endlessly ahead. College, work, family, dreams still unwritten. That day at Point Sur was supposed to be like countless others. Sun, salt water, and waves to ride. But beneath the surface, predators stirred. Sharks were the constant fear, gray shadows that haunted every surfer's imagination. Parents warned their kids about riptides, about jagged reefs, about fins slicing through the surface. Yet not once did anyone warn of killer whales. They were the stuff of documentaries, of ocean myths. Majestic, intelligent, untouchable, and, supposedly, harmless to humans. Hans believed it too. Why wouldn't he? No surfer alive carried the thought that an orca might one day rise from the depths to make him prey. That belief, that sense of safety, would vanish in seconds, because Hans Kretschmer was about to become one of the only humans in history to feel the full force of a wild killer whale's bite. Point Sur is not a place for the timid. A lonely stretch of the California coast, where jagged cliffs loom over a restless sea. The waves here rise hard and unforgiving, shaped by deep canyons that funnel the Pacific's power into sudden walls of water. For surfers, it's a proving ground. For predators, it's a hunting ground. On that day in 1972, the ocean was alive. Gulls circled overhead, sea lions clustered on the rocks, barking as they slipped into the surf. Their sleek black shapes darted beneath the waves, the very prey orcas are built to kill. The water at Point Sur is deep, dark, and cold, dropping off quickly from the shoreline. It's a place where shadows move beneath you, where surfers often feel watched, but never see what waits below. Everyone worried about great whites here. This stretch of coast has always been their territory. But the truth that afternoon was more unexpected, more terrifying. Hans paddled out into water thick with life. The horizon stretched endless, but beneath his board lurked a predator far larger than any shark. A predator that shouldn't have been here, that shouldn't have noticed him at all. But something was different that day. The orca was close, circling, watching, and Hans, balanced on his board under the California sun, had no idea he was seconds away from becoming prey. The killer whale, orca. To most of the world, a marvel. Black and white giants leaping in documentaries, symbols of intelligence and grace. But in the wild, stripped of glossy images and tourist shows, the orca is something else entirely. It is the ocean's top predator, up to 30 feet long, weighing as much as 10 tons. Teeth built not to tear, but to hold, to crush, to suffocate. Orcas hunt in packs, striking with strategy and precision. They flip seals into the air. They ram great white sharks until the sharks drown. They toy with prey before finishing the kill. And almost never, do they touch humans. For centuries, that unwritten pact stood. Surfers, sailors, divers, all swam with the knowledge that orcas simply weren't interested in us. But that rule shattered at Point Sur. Hans Kretschmer became the exception. An orca doesn't bite lightly. Its jaw pressure is strong enough to crush bone in an instant. Its speed underwater rivals the fastest predators on Earth. When it chooses to strike, escape is nearly impossible. This wasn't a curious nudge. This wasn't a mistake Hans could shrug off. This was a calculated lunge from below. And for the first time anyone could remember, a wild killer whale had decided a human looked like prey. Hans was gliding across the face of a wave when it hit. No warning. No fins slicing the water. No shadow creeping below. Just an explosion of force from the deep. The orca rose beneath him like a missile, its jaws snapping shut around his thigh and side. The impact was bone-shattering, a clamp of teeth designed for seals but now tearing into human flesh. Hans was yanked clean off his board and driven under in a storm of bubbles and blood. He tried to scream, but salt water filled his throat. Pain seared through his body, hot and blinding. He thrashed instinctively, but against the sheer power of the whale he was nothing, just a ragdoll in its grip. Time slowed. He could feel the crushing weight of the bite, the suffocating pull of the water, the icy realization that this was not a shark. The black and white blur beside him confirmed the impossible. A killer whale had him. The ocean around him clouded red. Above, the surface shimmered like a fading dream, just out of reach. And all Hans could think, as he hung in the jaws of the largest predator on Earth, was that this was how surfers died. Silently, swallowed by the sea. The crushing jaws dragged Hans deeper. Salt water roared in his ears, blood billowed from his wounds. Every nerve in his body screamed that this was the end. But somewhere, instinct fought back. With what strength he had, Hans thrashed. He clawed at the orca's head, raked his hands against its rubbery skin. He kicked violently, his free leg hammering against the predator's flank. The whale's teeth ground into him, but the struggle disrupted its grip. For a split second, the jaws loosened. Hans twisted, an act of desperation more than strategy. Somehow, impossibly, he tore free. His lungs were ready to burst. He kicked upward, clawing for the surface, every stroke leaving a crimson trail behind him. The water seemed endless, heavy, refusing to let him go. Behind him, the massive shadow lingered. The orca circled, a ghost in the deep, watching. Hans broke the surface in a ragged gasp, coughing seawater and blood. His board was gone. His body was failing. And yet, he was alive. For now. Because when the ocean's top predator releases you, it's never clear if it's finished, or just beginning the hunt. Hans surfaced in a froth of red. His body was shredded, his thigh and side torn open to the bone. The saltwater seared his wounds like fire. Every wave threatened to drag him back under. Onshore, surfers and beachgoers froze. At first, they thought it was a shark attack. Then they saw the black and white shadow circling beneath him, unmistakable even at a distance. A killer whale. Shouts erupted across the beach. Boards hit the water as surfers paddled toward him. Each second felt like an eternity. The ocean too vast, the injured boy too far. Hans clung desperately to consciousness. The horizon blurred, his arms heavy, his breath ragged. He knew he was bleeding out. He knew the predator was still there. And he knew one slip beneath the waves would mean he'd never come back up. Then, hands. A fellow surfer grabbed him, hauling him across a board slick with blood. Another pushed from behind, kicking furiously toward the shallows. Every movement left a trail through the water, a signal to the orca that its prey was escaping. The rescuers didn't look back. They didn't dare. Behind them, the sea boiled with mystery. Dark, silent, waiting. They hit the shallows in a frenzy, waves pounding, boards scraping sand. Hans was dragged from the surf, his limp body leaving a crimson trail across the wet shoreline. The sight stopped everyone cold. His wetsuit was shredded, hanging in tatters. His thigh and side were split open in grotesque wounds, raw muscle exposed where teeth had torn through. Blood poured freely, pooling on the sand and staining the water at his feet. Surfers shouted for help, voices breaking with panic. Towels became makeshift bandages, pressed hard against the gaping injuries. Each touch made Hans cry out, a sound that cut through the chaos. A teenager caught between life and death. Someone sprinted for the road, waving down a car, screaming for an ambulance. The small beach had no lifeguards, no emergency station. Every second bled him weaker. Hans' eyes fluttered, his lips moving soundlessly. Those nearest swore they heard him whisper, "It wasn't a shark," before slipping back into shock. On the sand that day, the Pacific had given back a boy who should have been dead. But the image of him, broken, bloodied, barely clinging to life, was seared into every witness. The question lingered in the salt air. How had anyone survived a killer whale's bite? By the time the ambulance arrived, Hans was pale and fading fast. The siren wailed through the winding roads of Big Sur, a desperate race against blood loss. Every bump in the road drew a moan from his broken body. Paramedics pressed gauze into the wounds, but the bleeding refused to stop. His wetsuit had been cut away, revealing a lattice of teeth marks across his side and leg, jagged punctures so deep they seemed inhuman. At the hospital, doctors fought with everything they had. IV lines were jammed into his arms, fluids pumping, monitors screaming warnings. Surgeons bent over him, stitching torn muscle, reconnecting what the orca's teeth had nearly destroyed. Over 100 stitches, hours of work, a room filled with the sharp tang of antiseptic and the iron smell of blood. The medical staff whispered to each other, astonished. An orca did this? None of them had ever seen injuries like it. Hans drifted in and out of consciousness, his young face pale against the white sheets. Each time his eyes opened, the same terror flashed through them. Salt water, black and white shadows, the sensation of being dragged under. He had lived through the unthinkable, but survival came at a cost. The attack was etched into his body forever. Why did it happen? That was the question that haunted everyone, from Hans himself to scientists around the world. Orcas are apex predators, yes, but not of humans. In the wild, there had been no record of an orca deliberately hunting a person. They were called wolves of the sea, but never man-eaters. Hans's attack shattered that illusion. Marine biologists pored over the details. Hans had been wearing a black wetsuit, sleek and seal-like in the cold Pacific water. At the same time, sea lions crowded Point Sur, their bodies darting and vanishing beneath the waves. To an orca, honed by millions of years to kill seals, the confusion could have been instant. An easy strike at the wrong target. And then there was the telling fact. The whale bit once, then let go. If it had meant to kill, Hans would have been gone in seconds. Orcas are capable of tearing a sea lion apart in a heartbeat. Instead, this one released him, disappearing back into the deep. But does mistaken identity erase the horror of nearly being torn in half? For Hans, it didn't matter whether the orca had confused him with prey or simply changed its mind. For a few endless seconds, he was prey, and that truth lingered long after the stitches healed. The mystery endures. Why that whale struck at all? Was it hunger? Curiosity? A single fatal error? Or was it a reminder that no matter how much we think we know, the wild does not play by our rules? Hans survived, but survival didn't mean escape. His body bore the story forever, long, jagged scars running down his thigh and across his side. More than 100 stitches marked where the orca's teeth had carved into him. Every time he looked in the mirror, the memory stared back. For surfers, sharks were the nightmare. Sharks circled beaches, stalked prey, sometimes struck. But Hans was now the exception to an unwritten rule. Orcas don't attack humans. He had lived through what experts said simply didn't happen, and that fact isolated him as much as it defined him. Whispers followed him. To some, he was the boy who had lived through the impossible. To others, a living reminder of how fragile we really are in the ocean. When he returned to the water, people watched him. Did he still trust it? Could he paddle out again, knowing what lurked below? Hans himself never forgot. The pain, the panic, the crushing power of the whale. It returned in flashes, in dreams, in the salty sting of seawater on his skin. He had been mistaken for prey. For a heartbeat in time, the ocean's most powerful predator had chosen him. And somehow, he had lived to tell it. Hans Kretschmer's story forces us to confront a truth most of us ignore. In the ocean, we are not the rulers. We are trespassers. For centuries, orcas have been mythologized as majestic, intelligent, even benevolent. And most of the time, that image holds true. Surfers, divers, kayakers, millions enter the water, and orcas glide past without harm. But Hans's blood on the Pacific proves a harsher reality. Intelligence does not erase instinct. To the whale, he was not a boy, not a surfer, not human. He was a dark shape in the water, a meal. That is the razor's edge we walk when we enter the wild. A second's confusion, a single mistake of identity, and everything changes. Hans lived, barely. But his survival is less comforting than it is sobering. Because if even the ocean's most friendly apex predator can mistake us for prey, then what safety do we really have? The truth is as deep as the sea itself. When we slip beneath the waves, we are no longer at the top of the chain. We are simply another body in the water. Hans Kretschmer was just 18 when he became one of the only people on Earth to feel the jaws of a wild killer whale and live to tell it. His survival is almost mythic, but also terrifying. Thank you for watching. If you want more stories like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss the next true account of man versus nature. And stay tuned, because the next story is even darker.